Zelensky. That seems to be the statement coming in from President Trump. Says that he will have a word with President Zelensky of Ukraine. And however, there has been no pause or even a ceasefire, however, that has been reached. But Donald Trump is of the opinion that they are very close, pretty close on reaching to a deal. But when it comes to negotiating a ceasefire to end Russia's war in Ukraine, well, that hasn't happened yet. Now it seems that Donald Trump now is putting the onus back on President Zelensky. And he says not just him, Mr. Prabhudeval, other European nations as well. Because if they like, then the next meeting probably could happen in Moscow.
Well, I agree with what the other panelists have just said. The summit meeting today between President Trump and the Russian President Putin has indicated that ending the Russia-Ukraine war is going to be extremely difficult due to the significant disagreements on key issues and a lack of trust between the two warring sides. Now, the White House had already lowered expectations for a breakthrough and said that it was a listening session and a feel-out meeting. Now, President Trump and his administration officials had indicated that today's summit in Alaska was not meant to be one that would bring the fighting to an end in Ukraine, but it was meant to be one that will take the process forward. And he had said that there would be a path which would need to be taken for a follow-up summit involving both President Putin and the Ukrainian President Zelensky for any concrete progress to be made on a ceasefire. President Trump had also recently tried to project today's summit as a prelude to an unscheduled meeting that could take place soon between the two warring sides, Russia and Ukraine. Now, while President Trump has been pushing for a ceasefire agreement that could end Russia's 3-year war against Ukraine, the fact is that the huge divergence between the Russian and Ukrainian positions makes it extremely difficult to bring this conflict to an end. Now, Zelensky had already said that the Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska will achieve nothing, and that Ukraine will not cede any territory, and that any peace deal, excluding Kyiv, would lead to dead solutions. Therefore, I was not surprised that President Trump and President Putin emerged from their high-stakes meeting without a clear agreement on the war in Ukraine, and President Trump said that he had made some headway in his talks with
well, both sides
Putin.
seem that they are not ready to budge. But, will it stop when it comes to the European nations in arming Ukraine? Will it stop the United States in arming Ukraine? Well, that doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon. But, President Putin is of the opinion that the conflict in Ukraine would not have started if Donald Trump would have been in office back in 2022. Let's put out exactly what President Putin is of the opinion, because Donald Trump, who repeatedly spoke in recent days about wanting to have a second meeting after the Alaska summit, says that he sees the possibility of the next meeting happening in Moscow. However, there is still no clarity. Neither of the leaders have announced that if a second meeting that would be held. But this is a development that now we are learning, that President Putin is now of the opinion with regards to Ukraine and the security. Well, they have been keeping it, as their topmost concern. But however, it seems that there is no ceasefire, not even a pause in the war in sight.
I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities, and I said it quite directly back then that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war, and I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good, businesslike and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner the better, to the end of the conflict in Ukraine.
Well, Matt, that's the point, Matt. When we speak of the Russian leader, because Putin has said that, they're sincerely interested in putting the war to an end. But for that to happen, there are conditions that need to be followed, especially when it comes to root causes of the crisis that must be eliminated.
Exactly. Look, I think that what Donald Trump has pointed out, at least domestically and quite extensively, is it is factual that Russia invaded the Ukraine once under Barack Obama and once under Joe Biden, and not when Donald Trump was president his first time. So that's indisputable. I also think, though, that Vladimir Putin is a master at these meetings, and he knows that the greatest way to build camaraderie and friendship with Donald Trump is to flatter him. And clearly that is a very flattering construct. But ultimately, what needs to be addressed here is a couple things. One is, a lot of hay has been made about, Ukraine and being a member of NATO. America doesn't want Ukraine to be a member of NATO, for one. I don't know if they would ever get the votes for that to occur. So that's first and foremost. Second, the reason why we don't want them to be a member of NATO is the Article 5 guarantee, which would be an attack on one is an attack on all, which means that American soldiers would be put into the breach if Russia ever attacked the Ukraine again. That's not going to happen, at least while Donald Trump is president. So if Europe would like to step up and offer some security guarantees separate and distinct from NATO, and this is where what Donald Trump said about Europe not meddling in the conversation, the Europeans have tried to play the tough guy here, but they're doing it with America's checkbook. So if Europe wants to step up and fund the Ukraine to defend themselves, by the way, in a war that the Ukraine is losing territory, albeit slowly, and Ukraine has fought mightily against the Russians, they're ultimately never going to win, and they're never going to get the land that they've lost back. So what Vladimir Zelensky needs to do is he needs to find a way to stop the killing and get the best peace possible that provides him with the security guarantees for the future that doesn't have